Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond. Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, Ugandan NGOs work against national interests on oil matters. On Thursday last week, President Museveni spoke to Parliament and attacked non-governmental organizations for their criticism of his actions in the oil and gas sector, singling out ACODE, a prominent think tank, and Bishop Zach Nirinje, the retired assistant Anglican Bishop for Kampala. Several NGOs had spoken about the president's campaigning for the new oil bill that eventually gave powers to license oil industry operators to the minister rather than an established oil authority. The president said he had ordered the Inspector General of Government to particularly investigate ACODE over charges they bribed legislators to oppose the president's plan. NGOs deny the charges. Debate was polarized, with many MPs saying with the current levels of corruption in government, giving powers to license oil companies to one individual, that's the energy minister, would open the sector up to possible corruption. The president's position later won the day, but not before repeated meetings, during which he intensely lobbied his NRM legislators to support his position. Nearly 200 legislators stayed out of the final voting session in Parliament, and as some civil rights activists say, this means that bill won only a technical majority but was not popular enough to have carried the day in a genuine vote. Now, ACODE has already had its bank accounts scrutinized, which they say they do not mind, but charge it tantamounts to an attempt to stifle genuine debate on public accountability issues. President Museveni charges that NGOs are being funded by foreign players, while NGOs retort that they are funded by the same foreigners that fund the government, even though some of these donors have now suspended aid to government over massive corruption. And so on Spectrum tonight, we speak to both sides to try and establish whether the attacks by government are really justified and if the NGOs are indeed involved in subversive activities. Our guests tonight, Mr. Godber Tumushabe, Executive Director of ACODE. You're most welcome, Mr. Tumushabe.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, listeners.
On the line, we're joined by Honorable Frank Tumwebaze, Minister in charge of the Presidency and Kampala. In the studio, our second guest is Ambassador Kintu Nyago, Deputy Head of Mission at the United Nations in New York, also a regional geopolitical expert. You're most welcome, Mr. Ambassador Kintu Nyago.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, listeners.
Mr. Tumushabe, you people in ACODE, why are you intent on diverting the debate on oil?
Well, I don't know whether I should respond to that question because that is really not what we are trying to do. As I have said previously, as an organization, but also as individuals who work with this organization and many other individuals, we've been engaged in the oil debate at least for the last over 6 or 7 years, since around 2006. I think our first research paper on oil governance issues was first published in 2006. And since that time, we've worked with a wide range of government agencies, including Ministry of Energy, including Parliament, including other civil society organizations, local governments. So we've worked with them, and really our interest has been that as strategic as the oil resources are, we need to make sure that Ugandans have an opportunity to really engage in a meaningful dialogue on how best to manage and govern these resources. And all that we've done is to basically contribute to that, to building that consciousness and knowledge through our research, through our outreach, which is the business that we do as an organization.
So what exactly are your points?
One is that first of all, our engagement and investment in the oil debate is based on the National Oil and Gas Policy 2008. When you look at that policy, the policy is actually very clear on the kinds of things that government needs to do to make sure that the oil resources are governed well. One is government committed to enact legislation, because there is a recognition under the policy that the old laws, the 1983 laws, were really outdated given the developments in the sector. So government...
The 1985 laws.
85, yes. So government committed itself to enact new laws. And our effort has been to be able to make sure and work with government and other actors to make sure that those laws are enacted. Secondly, in that policy, government recognizes that the participation, the engagement of civil society, of cultural institutions and other institutions is important. And again, our interest has been to say, no, let's, given the kinds of skills and competencies that we have, let's make a contribution to make sure that civil society in this country, cultural institutions, local government officials are actually meaningfully engaged in the debate. And then thirdly, as an institution that believes substantially in the rule of law and good governance and fully understands the relationship between oil and politics, and we've been focused on making sure that the laws that are enacted actually contain sufficient safeguards and accountability mechanisms to make sure that whichever agency, whichever official is given authority to make certain decisions are accountable to the people of Uganda through the relevant institutions. So those are really have been our issues, and the idea that organizations like ours and many others in civil society that they promote foreign interests, I think is a total misunderstanding of the work that civil society does. Because admittedly, civil society organizations in this country receive funding from donors, from bilateral donors, from foundations. As we have argued elsewhere, the same donors that fund our organizations fund government of Uganda.
Oh. You sure about that?
No, of course. I mean, ACODE, for example.
You don't get any cash from enemy governments.
No, you see, Edmond, we are law-abiding citizens, and I think Ugandans need to understand that. Some of us are very, very judicious in trying to make sure that we comply with the laws of this country, because we love our country, and we actually cherish respect for the law. So there is no way, if government of Uganda declared a certain country or certain organization hostile, I would be the last person to go there and say, oh, give us funding to go and do the following things.
Right.
I would never do it, because I love my country.
Right, and well, I'm not aware that there's any country that's been declared hostile.
No, not as far as
this far. Ambassador Kintu Nyago, why is the government locking horns with these NGOs, so well-intentioned?
Well, to start with, Edmond, you find that true, Mr. Tumushabe says that donors, the same donors who fund government are the same donors who fund the NGOs. That's true, generally speaking. But now the difference is that governments are a different cup of tea from NGOs. Governments, like for example the government of Uganda, I can't talk for all governments, but the government of Uganda is democratically constituted. It has other sources of funding. For example, it has revenue, but also it is democratically constituted, and it's a durable entity. Now, NGOs are of varying quality. Some are young, some are old and established, some are weak. Now you find that some NGOs, for example, have one donor, one major donor. And if that donor, for whatever reason, decides to either do two things, change the agenda of the funding or to stop funding, that NGO might collapse or would collapse. Now governments will not collapse because, for example, in Uganda's case, Idi Amin never had many external donors. The World Bank and IMF, as an example, stopped funding the government of Uganda under Idi Amin. But as we are all aware, I mean, the Republic of Uganda under Idi Amin, the Second Republic, as they called it, would have lasted longer had the Mwalimu Nyerere and the TPDF kicked him out of power. And there are sanctions against Idi Amin. Now, it's important to bear in mind, Edmond and the listeners, that the president is a credible person. He's a credible person. I mean, he'll be a serious, credible person. Also, he has access, unlike most people have access to information, but he has access to wide sources of information.
Yes.
From state agencies, non-state agencies, from individuals, because he's the president and people write to him, people inform him, and so against that background you find he's very well informed. Now, It's true. I mean, I cannot blame, say, ACODE. I'm not privy to that information, but it's true, or it's not far-fetched to assume that NGOs can be compromised. Also, it's not. One should note it's not far-fetched to assume that there are certain interests, foreign interests, that would like to influence events. For example, this government has been, and I followed because I was in the State House then.
That's the White House.
Not necessarily.
Go on.
The government, the president was very intransigent and very committed on certain principles. I mean, he did not just give in. And the sharing agreements and all those agreements, the process of making them was very protracted. In some countries, you find that these things are written in Europe, in London, and then African governments, where the oil is, just signed them. But in Uganda's case, this has been a very protracted process. And by the way, some of these major multinationals only conceded to the position of the government after the president got 70% in the elections. They probably would have thought he was not going to win. So, but when he had a large mandate, they realized that he's here to stay for a long haul, and they acceded.
Another 5 years at least.
Well, that's long enough. Now, it's also important to bear in mind the politics of oil and how powerful and external forces influence, especially events in weak countries. And they destabilize a number of them. Take the example of Congo. Congo has no oil, but I mean, because of its rich mineral resources. From the 60s, Lumumba was killed by the Belgians because of his nationalistic policies vis-à-vis the control of resources. Or you take Equatorial Guinea. It's Mugabe who saved the president of Guinea. Mercenaries were flying to Equatorial Guinea, and for whatever reason they landed in Harare, and Mugabe arrested them. Or Libya. Why is there no fly zone in Somalia? Why is there no fly zone in many other countries that have had conflicts? But once Libya had a conflict because of its huge oil resources, no fly zone. Or Nigeria, many of these coups in Nigeria were funded, it's claimed have been funded. I mean, Nigeria was chronic with, in the past with coups and counter coups. But all multinationals, Shell and others, were quite instrumental. And Savimbi himself in Angola was being funded by such similar whatever. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are now engaged in a situation whereby oil as a resource is a very major resource in this world that needs this resource.
Yes.
And the politics of oil is quite dirty.
Right. Oh, it's dirty.
Oh yes, oh yes. So it requires, well, it's good that if we can have ethical people like Mr. Tumushabe claims to be, but the point is we have to be vigilant.
All right. We've just been joined by Honorable Frank Tumwebaze on the line. He's the Minister in charge of the presidency in Kampala. Good evening, Honorable Tumwebaze.
Good evening, Edmond. My network is very poor though, but I can speak.
All right, let's talk to us now. Why is your president attacking NGOs? They are trying to clean up the oil sector. One of you has just told us that that's a sector, it needs to be cleaned up, and they are helping you to clean it up, and you're fighting these men. Why?
Clean up what? They are just going confusion. They are not appreciating the policy that Ugandans want to understand. The president was in parliament, to have his speech. He enumerated the policy mistakes Uganda has avoided. I will not hear what the NGOs are saying. Why are they on the sentiments of the sensational matters, or the political matter? Why are they not helping the policy? They take shape. If, for example, the president says we must strategically do that finally, cut costs on exporting crude oil, cut costs on heating the pipeline, is he making sense? Is he speaking sense? Why can't they, for example, say the president of Uganda there is talking rubbish, or is talking a point, and therefore give him kudos? That's point number one. What the president is saying, Uganda's capacity was to explore the oil. We were not at the mercy of companies who will be having conflicting interests.
Well, but I was saying again, Honorable Tumwebaze. The line is that bad, we've lost you. We'll try to get back to you. Honorable Tumwebaze. Mr. Godber Tumushabe, is this law that bad?
Godber.
Is that law that bad?
Is the
law that was passed, is it that bad?
No, you see, first of all, I think we need to appreciate that government, I think, did the right things. In as much as it was on the urging of Parliament to be able to introduce the draft laws in Parliament. I think that one, we must recognize it, that it was great that government, after delays of almost 4 years after the policy was promulgated, that they were able to bring the laws in Parliament. Secondly, that there are also a couple of amendments that actually were made to the bill, the upstream bill. Amendments to do with the national oil company, to do with the issues of transparency and access to information, and we haven't been able to assess the extent of the amendments because we don't have the final text of the final bill. But I think what Ugandans need to understand is that when we raise issues, and these are issues to do with Clause 9, the powers of the minister, it is not really not to say that nothing has been done. Admittedly, many of us have been very, very clear in terms of, like, yes, it is good that the president and government has provided leadership on we need a refinery. It is good that government has...
You agree with him on that?
Absolutely,
yes.
Absolutely. It's good that government has invested in training scientists, and you see, I also don't want, by the way, the government just to take credit for it, because those scientists have been trained with Ugandan taxpayers' money.
Well, but there's leadership. Government has provided leadership.
So government offers leadership. So Ugandans win together because we pay taxes, government provides leadership, and we're able to achieve something. But when it comes to the controversial issue of Clause 9, we are basically saying there is the governance of the sector going forward, not looking backwards. Going forward, the governance of the sector depends on how you build checks and balances within the decision-making process to make sure that whoever is given particular responsibilities is accountable to the people of Uganda. Because you see, Deputy Ambassador Designate Kintu Nyago talked about government is democratically elected. Exactly. But you see, when citizens of Uganda elect a government, they don't surrender their power and responsibility to government. Government is supposed to serve the people. So government needs to keep listening on a day-to-day basis. It is not to say, oh, because we have elected you, we voted for you, even if we gave you 100%, you are our servant. You don't all of a sudden turn out to be this monarch where everybody pay homage. And I think that leaders need to understand that they are there to serve the interests of the people. They are not masters. If anything, they are simply leading, and they have been given an honor to lead, and that honor should not be abused by relegating Ugandans to the periphery.
Well, but Clause 9 that you're talking about gives powers to license companies to the minister. You wanted that power to be given to an authority. What's the problem? Why can't you allow the minister to give licenses?
Let me, if you give me a moment, I want to really explain why this is important. There are two important points here.
Go on.
One is that the power to issue license or revoke or negotiate agreements is actually the actual decision-making process. So you don't want to vest that responsibility in an entity which is where this is a political appointee.
Yes.
As far as I'm concerned. And I think this is a point where we can disagree or agree. But I think that my position, my understanding is that you don't want to vest such a responsibility in an appointed office. This is a political appointee, period. Secondly, there are people who have been saying, you separate regulation and issuing of licenses. Now, for me, speaking as a lawyer, I know that licenses concessions and permits in a sector like oil and many other sectors are not just investment instruments, they are also regulatory instruments. The regulatory agency uses these instruments to regulate the activities in the sector. Take the example. Maybe Uganda has determined and said this is the best technology you can use in the production of oil. That technology, it means that the regulatory agency will ensure that that technological requirement is included in the instrument. How many barrels of oil, recoverable oil, how much are you able to produce? So the regulatory agency uses these instruments to regulate the activities in the sector. So every time I keep on asking myself, why is it difficult to understand that you have an entity out there issuing a license or a permit and another one regulating? What are you regulating? In fact, I would argue that given the law that has been passed with the licensing powers vested in the minister, I can assure you, Ugandan taxpayers would be better off if you didn't have an authority. Because what is it going to do?
Mr. Kintu Nyago, what guarantees do we have that these powers will not be abused in one individual appointed by the president?
We have one of the best constitutions in the world. And we have formative or young but very dynamic institutions that are playing out well within this constitutional framework. We have got checks and balances, and we have got the political will. Very importantly, I think the responsibility of the executive, are really vested in His Excellency the President, who fortunately, based on our constitution, is elected by the Ugandans. The current president, as I may need to remind listeners, got close to 70%. That's not quite usual.
68 actually. It's a big margin.
Close to 70%.
In a free and fair election, moreover.
That's not, well, as free and as fair as humanly possible.
Yes.
And this is not usual. I mean, this is not very common. I mean, in Ghana, the current leader got 50%, 50.7%. Mr. Obama, I think, got 49 something. I don't know.
56.
Well, whatever he got. But the point is, 70 is quite in a class of its own. So against that background, he has the mandate of the people. Now, all these responsibilities you have with the ministries are actually the president's responsibilities. But because he's a human being, he cannot be Minister of Defense, he cannot be Minister of Finance, so he delegates these responsibilities to his ministers, say Minister of Petroleum and Energy. Now, the minister is as politically appointed as any of those ladies, eminent ladies and gentlemen who are going to be under authority. Because that authority will not have anybody. The president does not sign his instrument of whatever. Just like the Human Rights Commission or the Electoral Commission, all those are political appointees. So, but the important point is that these responsibilities are the president's responsibilities, but because the president cannot do the nitty-gritty of all these responsibilities,
so he delegates.
He delegates through ministers. Now, that said, Uganda, fortunately, we are not, and through deliberate policy also, it's not just by coincidence, we are not, the policy of government is not to recreate the wheel. And then, you don't need to go through the mistakes of others to learn. A wise woman or wise man does not need to go through the mistakes of others to learn. We have seen bad case scenarios in the oil sector. We have seen good case scenarios in the oil sector.
Right.
Now, for example, with Norway, it is the minister who has these responsibilities. And Norway is a good case scenario. That is why, and this strengthens our case.
All right, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. We're going for a break. We'll be back to stay tuned.
The Dubai Shopping Festival is back in January, so you need to know a few bargaining tricks to get the very best prices. First, pretend you don't like the item.
Madam, isn't it beautiful?
Ah, it's falling apart.
Then walk to the door, but hesitate just a little.
Madam, wait.
Now, make a lowball offer.
Okay, 20 dirhams. Last price.
Not again. Okay.
At finally, fly in comfort with Emirates award-winning service and entertainment and arrive fresh and ready to shop. Book now. Call Emirates on 417-710-444 or visit emirates.com/UG. Fly Emirates. Hello tomorrow.
Excuse me, guys. Let me through, please.
Yes.
Chick this guy. Goodness, dude, what are you doing? Get real. Just move a little. What? A little bit.
Man, what are you doing bringing a cow into the sitting room?
It's just for when I want milk. Just what? Just please move. Let it come and sit here.
What's wrong with this guy? You cannot keep a cow in your home, but you can get the freshness of its milk straight from the farm into your home. Get fresh dairy milk for freshness straight from the farm every day. Fresh Diary, so fresh.
Ça va? Hello. My name is Kogole Andemina, very serious Congolese tailor. People see me when they want to look good. People leave my shop looking like superstars of TV. But however much I make you look beautiful or even sexy like me, I cannot change the person inside, the real you. Kind of like Uganda Waraji. It has this beautiful look, but inside they have maintained the same old spirit that we know. The same old spirit we have known for many years in a new suit. New look. Oh, you need to try it.
Enjoy the new look Uganda Waraji. The same Ugandan spirit with a new look. Uganda Waraji. Same spirit, new look. Excessive consumption of alcohol is harmful to your health. Not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly.
Discover the new invigorating taste of Red Vodka Lemon. Red Vodka Lemon. Reinvent the night. Not for sale to persons under 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight. Ugandan NGOs working against national interests on oil matters. Our guests tonight, Mr. Godber Tumushabe, Executive Director of ACODE, a think tank. Honorable Tumwebaze Minister in charge of the presidency and Kampala is joining us on the line. And Ambassador Kintu Nyago, also in the studio, is a deputy head of mission at the UN in New York, that's the United Nations. Also a regional geopolitical expert. You will be able to call in and contribute to this discussion tonight. Godber, how do countries that ensure transparency, that oil and other resources are a blessing rather than a curse, what do they do normally?
Now, I think I can draw on examples. It was quite intriguing when the government put out, or the Minister for Energy put out a statement trying to explain why it is important to vest the powers to issue licenses in the minister, and then she cited Norway, I think Thailand, I think Mozambique and Ghana, and I kept on thinking. I said, when you look at the entire list, you're looking at a list of countries that are democracies, or at least fairly democratic.
Just like Uganda.
Uganda is questionable because Uganda, we have excelled in electoral democracy, but the actual operation of where institutions are working, those that are required to be autonomous, they are autonomous. Those that are required to work with others, they work with others. You've seen what happens normally with Parliament. We've seen where Parliament makes decisions, including on this bill actually, and then the people in the movement caucus go and meet and conspire and say we are going to change this.
No, what's wrong with that? They are also elected representatives.
No, but you see, you can't get a party caucus, whether it is movement or FDC or whatever, any of these groups, to take over the legislative mandate of Parliament. So the idea that you have a group of politicians in their parties and they make a decision and say we are going to go and change what happened in Parliament, I think it's something difficult to appreciate, and you call that a democracy. You've seen where Parliament has said, oh, these people have been implicated in corruption scandals. We are not saying they are guilty, but their credibility is questionable. So we're asking them to resign. And someone said, no, I'm not resigning. Where did you see a parliament that is so powerless in terms of demanding for accountability from the executive? We've seen even in some cases of ministers who have been implicated in corruption scandals, or at least the ministers have been they have been ministers in ministries where Ugandan taxpayers have lost money, and the parliament says no, these ministers should resign, and the president says no, they can't resign, and of course the argument is always like, no, they are not guilty, they are not the one who stole the money. Now in a democracy, you don't have to have stolen to resign. You take political responsibility for failing to do the job that the president assigned to you and the people of Uganda pay you to do. So I think we can always argue about some of these things, but I think we still have a democracy deficit, and it is that deficit that we need to build. And even when we are legislating for oil, we have to take that into account.
But in this country, you don't have many qualified people. The president has a small pool to choose from. People are qualified with ministers. Why do you want him to drop people that are valuable?
No. That's not the point, Edmond. Actually, I think it's possibly coming up to the issue is the cup half empty or full. Because in my view, I think that Uganda is one of the most democratic societies we have in the world. Young democracy as we are. Our judiciary is not just autonomous, but it's highly rated in the Commonwealth. Same with our parliament. But then, we need to remember that many of these NGOs. Please. I didn't talk, Mr. Tumushabe.
One quick comment and then
Mr. Tumushabe, I didn't talk with you.
Okay.
Now, yes, you find that even our parliament is very autonomous and highly rated again. Recently just rated the best in the East African region and one of the best in the Commonwealth. But that said, it is many of our colleagues in the NGOs and so forth who call for multipartyism.
Yes.
Now, in multipartyism which we have now, I mean, things like structures like parliamentary caucuses are part and parcel of multipartyism, because the party must operate in such a way that the left hand knows what the right is doing.
Yes.
The right should not be moving. It must be coordination. That's what partyism, multipartyism is all about.
But some people think the president was overbearing this.
Well, the point is he's elected. The point is elected both by his party and by the government. So and I think that's healthy, because in the past people never had caucuses and they were being shot during Idi Amin's time. There was no caucus, and then if Amin thought that you are a bad man or had that impression of whatever reason, or wanted your wife, he would kill you. But now, as Churchill put it, and then Churchill was a man of action. He said, "Jojo is better than war." So caucusing is very healthy and is part and parcel of democracy. Now, we have many other institutions that are really autonomous. The Auditor General, very autonomous. Local governments, our local governments are elected. Take a country like Ghana. Their local governments are appointed. But in ours, from the village, in Ghana they have got chiefs, patriarchal chiefs, but here from the village to LC2, LC3, district, elected. So very, very democratic. Now, is there impunity vis-a-vis the issue of corruption? People just eat money with impunity without being that's not true. That's not the Uganda we live in. Uganda is one of the first African countries that have impeached ministers. Honorable Chikaire, a top heavy, and these are not chicken thieves. Yes. A top heavy NRM. No. That's not the point. The point I'm trying to make with Chikaire's contribution vis-a-vis the NRM struggle is very respected. His house in Makindi was the house where Mr. Museveni and the first gorillas who attacked Kabamba came from. Yes. You see? And then in Nairobi, Mr. Chikaire played a very key role as a member of the external wing. But he was made with with I think very scanty evidence, to resign from parliament. I mean from cabinet.
Yeah, he was pro-privatization.
Mr. Jim Wes. Honorable Chirula Chivejinja. These are not chicken thieves or taxi touts.
They're serious men.
Very credible, very credible people. And then, General Kazini, when it was discovered that he was engaged in corruption, he was thrown in the cooler for 1 year in Luzira. General Kazini is not, some border rider.
He's a army commander.
The army commander, seasoned person who fought the ADL, fought Konyi, and not just him. And a couple of other generals, Lakara and others, were thrown into prison. You see? So there is the highest level of political whatever. Even in America, they don't do that. Highest level of political commitment to fight corruption by this government.
What's the quality of consensus on this bill? 200 MPs stayed almost 198. What's the quality of consensus on it? Does that not dent its credibility?
Change the laws. You could change the law, the parliamentary procedure, and say that for any serious law to go through, it has to have, say, 3/3. Otherwise, if it's one, what are the time?
First past the post.
Majority. Simple majority. We could change the rules. You could change the rules, but if not, if it's simple majority, for example, the constitution in Egypt of the Islamic Brotherhood, they have won the indication by a slim majority, possibly 51%.
Yes,
but that's it. Yeah, they've got it. Otherwise, change the laws.
Godber, in your own assessment, is all going to be a blessing or will it be a curse for us? It was a broad assessment.
I think let me quickly reflect on just two things that Ambassador Kintu Nyago talked about.
Yes.
One is I don't want the listeners to go away with the impression that some of us who raise some of the outstanding public policy issues in this country actually do not recognize the achievements, the contribution that President Museveni has made to this country. I think I have even written in my writings that I think that since independence, President Museveni is one huge of an opportunity that this country has gotten. I think for me, one of his major contributions was the, allowing that constitutional discourse that gave us the 1995 Constitution and the institutions that we have. I think there are quite a number of achievements we can recognize, and I think nobody should ever get away with the impression that some of us who are critical of what government is doing, that we don't acknowledge the contribution of both the President and the NRM.
Right.
But the second point I wanted to emphasize about the democracy, you see, Ambassador, when you talk about the judiciary, and you forget the fact that our Supreme Court has not been constituted for the last how many years, that Supreme Court cannot hear cases, that the Court of Appeal has not been fully constituted to hear cases. You see, that does not happen in a democracy. It doesn't happen at all. One of the constitutional responsibilities of the President and the Parliament is to make sure that those institutions are working, the judges are appointed.
Yes, go on.
And I think that is so important. So when you talk about the judiciary, one of the best in East Africa,
in the Commonwealth.
In the Commonwealth, I'm like, okay.
Give us your verdict. Is it going to be a good thing for us or not?
For me, it's you have to really give the marks at the end of the day. It cannot be now. I think that.
Well, look at the signs.
No,
we're going 6 years down the road.
No, you see, for me, my issue is that we've seen the script with some of the transactions we've made. Taro, Hardman, Heritage. We know that some of those cases we have litigation already going on in London, and so the experience of the minister actually exercising those powers which the minister has exercised, for me, has not been a good indicator of things to come. I think that Ugandans, given the way Clause 9 was passed,
yes,
I would only say Ugandans should keep their eyes open and demand for accountability from whoever is responsible.
Well, we're going to hear from the listeners. One word.
The last points Mr. Tumushabe made are good points. I mean, it is, yes, true. I mean, simply because
the good things about the fundamental change.
Yeah, and I mean, the fact that you can keep your eyes open and be assertive is the fundamental change. Because in the past,
it's a mere change of guards.
In the past, you couldn't do that.
They would drive you down the steps.
Now let me tell you about corruption. There was an MP called Sebastian Sebugwao,
yes,
who criticized Oito Jokes being corrupt as chairman of Coffee Marketing Board and also the head of the army. That man the following day was picked up from his constituency by Oito Jokes men and shot dead and never buried by his relatives. So Sebastian Sebugwao, I'm not talking about people who you can't verify. Sebastian Sebugwao of the DP. But the point I want to make, I think oil in Uganda will not be a curse. And then Sebastian mentioned these things in Parliament, where they're supposed to be parliamentary privilege. But was shot dead by Sokoro and others of those Oito Jokes men. No, but coming fast forward to today, oil will not be a curse.
Oh. You can read your lips on that?
Yeah, you have asked us to read the signs. It won't be a curse. True, there will be challenges because this is something unprecedented in our history. I mean, we are a third world country with whatever peasantry background and so forth, subsistence economy, but this is a huge resource, very money intensive and so forth. You find that there will be challenges, but clearly you can see that the leadership is attempting to fix these things. Laws are in place, capacity is being built, and with this kind of visionary leadership and plus the assertiveness of the population and other structures.
But you are trying to control them. They are helping you, and you
look. They want to crush them. They are not infallible. You know, in the Catholic Church, where possible good Catholics from, the Pope is infallible. Pope is not infallible.
Let's hear from the
democracy is all about self-criticism and criticism. So please,
I don't crash them under your feet. Now, listeners, this is Spectrum. You can call in our numbers 0414-348-111, 031-260-390, 031-226-1390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you are calling from. Spectrum, hello? Okay. Godber, you gave money to MPs. The president saw you and he said, or his people saw you and say you gave bribes. Why do you bribe MPs?
Do you see when you want to give a bribe?
Okay, Spectrum, we have a caller on the line. Hello? Yes, good evening, your name?
I'm calling from Kenya.
Yes.
I want to tell you, but I want to disagree with Kintu Nyago. He always expresses that he living example like with a joke.
We lost you there, and please do call back in as soon as you are able to. Godber, why did you bribe MPs?
No, I was just going to...
Okay, somebody. Hello?
No.
Yes?
Yeah, I have connection on this line.
Yes, your name, my friend?
Oh, yes, thanks. My name is Paul. I wanted to just I think the government position which is kind of an attack, rather an attack on NGOs and so on, called for. It's kind of distracting all the critical analysis that the public has on this issue. I think it's not proper for the government to kind of incite the public to more the NGOs, and I think it's really absurd. But the public is generally suspicious about the oil ministry. I don't know if you remember the time the president requested that there should be no discussion around oil. All these kinds of things contribute to great suspicion. It's 3 years the command and the authority and the control reported in it by majority, but that does not mean, imagine an unpopular president walks in and signs such a sweet constitution where the president gives away all the regime. I think what we need to do is to create a constitution that can work through all sorts of presidents, whether wicked, strong, or weak.
All right. Spectrum, hello? Hello? Okay, let's hear from you, Godber. You gave money to. Why did you bribe this man?
No, I was simply going to say that ACODE has been in existence since 2000.
Okay, I have another caller on the line. Your name? Yes.
I'm able to come back. My question, my simple supplement to Mr. Nyago, where I don't want to agree with him. It's now 26 years down the line. When you keep on expressing with your job, then you mean as if you want to justify the corruption we are seeing in the Ministry of Public Service, in the Ministry of the PM office. So today we expect you to deliver. Those guys who are being caught in corruption to be brought to book. But if you bring Oito Joko went long time ago. Thank you.
Alright, you can still call back in. Our number 0414-348-111, 031-226-0390, 031-226-1390. Godber.
Yeah, so basically...
Spectrum alert.
Good evening.
Good evening, your name?
Steven is my name.
Yes, Steven.
There has been, I don't know what to call it, but every time, especially people in the ruling party are talking, they keep on reminding us what happened in the past and things like that. They seem like to say, if I may use an analogy of someone who goes to the village and picks a lady who was maybe poor, uneducated, no privileges, no what, and brings them to town. And every time this lady asks for something, they remind that lady where they picked them from the village. Now, some of us are young, we didn't experience all that stuff. And we have grown up in a regime where we know one person, we know one system. Yes, it's good to know history, but we can't keep on playing history in our faces every day. We are asking, let's start from here. Let's do accountability. Let's perform. Let's give services. Not just keeping on reminding us how bad it was during the 70s, 60s, and things like that. Let's talk as managers, not as politicians. Managers think about what's going to happen tomorrow, not what was there much as they did on what was in the past. Thank you.
All right. Let's get back to the studio now.
Okay.
Ambassador Kintu Nyago.
I'll finish. Look, it is rather an effort in futility to attempt to be ahistorical, because the best analogy I can give is to drive on full speed without referring to your rear and side mirrors. Just drive full throttle. Look, as leaders, we have to be historical. Not that we should be tied down by history, but we should learn from history. And then I could cite Australian or Icelandic history. But I think the best examples are those that from our own historical situation. Now, regarding corruption and fighting against corruption, the examples that have been cited, and they are good examples, say in the OPA, in the Prime Minister's office, and so forth, that corruption was revealed not by external donors or the Scotland Yard or the FBI. That corruption was revealed by our own politicians. Mr. Mbabazi, I think, blow the whistle, and then also whatever it is. But I mean, Bigirimana cannot go and talk to the press without the Prime Minister giving him that authority. The PS doesn't have that authority. Now, that said also, you find that it's our own institutions, CID, the Auditor General himself, the press, civil society, our own institutions. So, and corruption is not a word that was invented when Museveni came to power. In case you are a believer, even in the Bible, there's corruption about Cain and Abel, I think Esau and Jacob, and so forth. And so forth. But the point is there the political will? Are there mechanisms self-correcting mechanisms? And clearly Uganda has them. That's why Parliament is calling these people to account. That's why the Auditor General writes the reports. That's why civil society plays its role. That's why the press plays its role. That's why the police, and nobody's going to go away scotch-free who has eaten this money.
Godber.
I think let me make 3 quick points. One is on ACODE giving money to MPs.
Yes, you give them brown envelopes. What color do you use?
ACODE has been in existence for the last 14 years. We've run programs, research, advocacy. We organize workshops. We organize all kinds of activities. And like many other organizations and government agencies do, when we do that, when we organize these activities, we make provisions to cover the costs of our participants, whether it is in terms of transport, sometimes in terms of per diems, depending on on the activity. So what we did with the organization of these consultations on oil really was not something new and unique. I think there can be a different argument on whether that is right or not.
How much did you give them? The president had a figure. Is that accurate?
No, of course the figure was not accurate, and I have issues with people like my friend Kintu Nyago who informed the president. I think that was bad to give him the wrong information.
Yes.
Secondly, really, and to wind up, is really to say the point that Ambassador Kintu Nyago made. You see, there are two different students of history. One student invokes history to make sure that they don't move forward. So you keep on referring backwards and you fear the future. Yeah, you fear the future.
No.
And that is the way we have used history, not only in Uganda but also in Africa. So you talk of slave trade and colonialism, and it's like you can't move forward. But there are those who refer to history so that you don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Like in my case.
And I think this country, we have trapped ourselves with our history, and we are not making the kind of progress that we should make in terms of transformation. I think we can do much better.
Well, but you say you gave them some money, some per diem, but you've already been holding meetings, bishops at Nirinji and so on, attacking the government. Don't you think the president has the right to speak out on such an important resource? Well, you say the president should not caucus and so on.
No, the president should caucus. I think it's only fair. The president should caucus. I think I have issues when the president or anybody caucuses to go and change the decisions of parliament. I think that's bad, that's wrong.
Well, let's call it lobbying. It's acceptable. It's about board.
You lobby when the parliament is going to make decisions. But once parliament has made decisions, for you to go and lobby to go and change them, I think it's not a good idea.
Even in America, the president has a veto power.
Yes.
So parliament is not infallible. Parliament, so if parliament makes a decision, for example, one time they said that to be a chairman of LC3, you have to have a A-level certificate or university degree.
Yeah.
Now that would have caused problems in this country because there are many sub-countries in Boheju or in Kabulasoke where there are no credible people with degrees to become whatever. So the president said no.
We saw them swearing.
Yeah.
They had a problem with them.
Yes.
Actually, for me, my point is that rather than the president or any of these political leaders using the caucusing to go and change the decisions of parliament, the president has this power that is vested in him, which is the veto power. I think the president should use the veto power to refuse the things that parliament has passed.
All right.
But to go and caucus and then come and change the decision of parliament, I think it's
you don't agree with
our democracy.
We have to go. Thank you very much, Mr. Godber Tumushabe, Executive Director of ACODE. That's a leading think tank. Thank you for coming to Spectrum tonight.
Thank you.
Ambassador Kintu Nyago, Deputy Head of Mission at the UN, the United Nations in New York, also regional geopolitical expert. Thank you for coming to Spectrum tonight. We're also joined in part by Mr. Frank Tumwebaze, Honorable Minister in charge of the presidency and Kampala. His line was so bad here to leave us before the time was up. Thank you for tuning in and staying with us up to the end. I've been your host, Edmond, Kizito. Spectrum. We'll be back tomorrow.
The Dubai Shopping Festival is back in January, so you need to know a few bargaining tricks to get the very best prices. First, pretend you don't like the item.
Madam, isn't it beautiful?
Ah, it's falling apart.
Then walk to the door but hesitate just a little.